I seemed to hear my name spoken in a beautiful voice. I felt totally, wonderfully happy, quite unafraid, eager to reach the light, which I somehow knew was the perfect place. Heaven, I suppose.
To me, death is a fascination. I think it's a fascination to every human being. But we live in a society that doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I'm interested in hearing what people have to say who have a view, who, in this particular case, think that they've experienced something.
The emotion I felt was so memorable, uplifted, transported, supremely at peace. Since that traumatic time, I have no fear of death, although the dying is not so easily dismissed.
The televisions are programmed with visuals and voices. The voices are people talking about experiences they've had of near death, and that is more or less become a popular term for people who have had an experience of physically being declared dead. So let's say they have a heart attack, and the hospital monitor shows that they have no brain activity, that their heart is stopped, so they are physically dead, and then they're revived. And in that interval, they seem to have interesting experiences. Then these voices are accompanied by oscilloscope patterns, which follow the rhythm of each voice. And each story in English, which is the dominant language of this particular installation, is interrupted by a myriad of other voices in many different languages, sort of mumbling or muttering in the background their own stories, as though they're desperate to get their stories out, but then they're interrupted by a louder voice, which you can hear more clearly, going on at length about a particular experience.
Hi, my name is Mark. I died from total kidney, liver, and respiratory shutdown. I have vague, very vague recollections of looking down on a body in a bed with tubes and machines, but I cannot honestly say that it was mine. Suddenly dusk became full blazing daylight, except with a brightness brighter than normally associated with daylight. Everything was bright as I was lifted without any feeling of pressure, upwards to a high point, I assume, since I was unaware of standing on anything, or for that matter aware of any body that I had. I was pure intellect, absorbing information and knowledge through sensors or means that I have no concept of.
In the computer world, a blue screen is called the screen of death. That means your computer is going to crash. That's very interesting and relevant in a metaphorical sense, but it's not what happens with a television set. A blue screen is a standby screen. And isn't it interesting that each one has its own personality and its own shade of blue? I love that. That's very painterly. And the same with the snow pattern, which is the kind of interference that we used to get on analog television when you're between channels and you're tuning. And the interference pattern per se is the kind that you used to get when you got to a station, but before the broadcast actually kicked in. So it's a sort of electric moment of a pattern appearing. And then the oscilloscope, which has the voices of the people who have died, supposedly, and speaking, is, the human reference to that individual person and their individual voice pattern. So, in a way, I'm playing with those things and putting them together in a way that I think it makes some kind of new sense out of all of it. I always try to use a material or a medium that matches the subject matter in some way and brings out the subject matter. That's how the piece came together, really, trying to find an appropriate medium for these thoughts that I had.
It happened as the result of a high-speed collision between my motorbike and a car that was making an illegal U-turn. I was traveling along a straight road at approximately 85 miles per hour when I noticed a slow stream of traffic coming towards me. As I reached about a third of the way past the convoy, one of the cars made an unannounced U-turn. It was a very solid hit, and I had the sensation of the beginnings of a long, slow-motion tumble. My first thought was, oh shit, I'm dead, now what? It seemed that the tumbling took place in a warm, soft void. However, I must point out that this is the only time in the whole experience that I can describe anything resembling a white light or tunnel. The night was dark, but I could see very clearly. I was floating around treetop level. I wasn't aware of possessing a body, but I still seemed to have binocular vision, and it was the middle of winter, but I wasn't aware of the cold. I had everything I needed. As far as I was concerned, I had my freedom. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I couldn't wait. I was on my way.
I've always been interested in things that occur in culture, whether they're ideas or images or histories that are somehow thought to be not worth noticing, or ridiculous, or even embarrassing, or something of the sort, because they persist. Like these sort of stories persist, and yet sort of the dominant cultural thrust is to ridicule them and say this is just made up, it's not true, etc., etc. My interest in it is, first of all, that the stories exist. I'm not worried about whether the people made them up, elaborated on them, fantasized, had a delusion. That's not the point. The point is the stories are there, and it's worth looking into them. So in this particular case, what fascinates me, and what I think is worth all of us paying a bit of attention to, is the fact that these stories exist, and they seem to contradict the idea that the brain, that our human brain, is the source of what we call consciousness, or reality, consciousness. Because if you are physically dead and your brain is dead, even if you're hallucinating, something has happened to you in the interval. And in the same way, this is my reason for using these analog television sets, it may well be that the brain isn't either producing the thoughts. It may be that the brain is more like a television set in that it is an instrument for receiving and transmitting thought, but not making it happen. I think that's what's at the bottom of all of this for me, is a lot of questions, about who we are.
This brightness ceased and was replaced with a view of the earth rapidly receding below me. I was still enveloped in a sense of warmth and comfort, but moving backwards at
I think I'm completely neutral as far as death goes. I take all these things on board. I think they're all very, very interesting. And I also take on board, or give a lot of weight to, because I'm culturally determined, just like the rest of us, I give a lot of weight to the fact that quite possibly when you're dead, you're dead. It may turn out 10, 20, 100 years from now that we are very crude about what we think death is. I don't know. I have no idea. But I think that if they have had some sort of experience, that's interesting. And it's worth pondering a little bit.
Next, I felt like I was being drawn away by some unknown force and moving at an enormous speed and traveling an enormous distance.
Lacan said, the dream, everybody's dreams, it's an indescribable experience, but we only have these poor words to tell it, and yet this is the basis for all art and literature. It's that attempt, to bridge that gap. I can only approach that through picturing or representing or allowing to speak other people, and then make a really big picture of all that, and then see where we go.